What do Ibec want to see the government do in the budget?
Well, I think it's on the energy front, it is beginning to shape up to be a significant shock to businesses as well as households. You know, that the bills that businesses are now looking at are anything up to 4 times the cost they were last year. And for particularly small, medium enterprises exposed to the domestic economy, this might be best described as the experience economy. That's kind of retail, hospitality and so on. Their margins won't be able to absorb that type of cost increase on that single item that is energy, because simultaneously the economy is still running rather hot out there and wage demands are still very high, you know. So energy and labour costs are usually the 2 biggest ones for those type of businesses. So I think we're going to have to, as a society, put our thinking hats on again in the way we did with COVID. And the good news is, relative to other jurisdictions, Ireland's in a much stronger position going into this crisis globally. We're still seeing the public finances roaring ahead, mainly driven by those corporate tax revenues, which, you know, people rightly say can't be depended upon, but you can depend upon them. They're available now. And the prediction is that, you know, we could see corporate tax revenues being over 20 billion at least this year. So against that backdrop, we may need to start thinking about how do we handle keeping businesses alive over the winter as well as keeping households intact. Targeting of those measures, I think, will be important. Not every business is going to require it. Every business will be impacted by the energy costs. Part of this, I think we need to say we may need to see some action like we did around COVID for keeping businesses alive. Everybody realises in a full employment scenario that wage growth in the economy is a natural outcome from that. But we're now looking at supercharged inflation, where there's that kind of, if you like, there's the, you know, the Russian invasion kind of premium. If we haven't ran out of gas, we just don't want to buy it from Putin. All right, it's not a shortage of fossil fuels that we're experiencing globally. It's a decision that we've collectively taken, that we want, you know, that we're going to collectively suffer as a result of that decision, and it's worthwhile doing so to confront that tyranny. But it is a real cost, and so the notion that people get away being left intact is just not feasible. In the attempts to try to do that, you'll make the situation worse. But clearly the labour market is clearing at wage rates in the order of 4 or 5% at least at the moment. And so, you know, that's what's happening out in the market. Some firms won't be able to pay that, going back to their margins being eroded by the energy costs. And I think that's the sensitivity that we need to look at this in the round in a way we did with COVID, to say, how do we get through this period of time? Now, this time round, we were certain, but of course we weren't right, that we thought COVID would go away fairly quickly. It didn't. There is a danger that this may persist a lot longer than just this winter, but at least in the short term, we have some of the firepower to handle it. Like, businesses will go into loss making. It's not to keep people intact in their profitability. We're talking about businesses that will actually fold now. You know, some of those businesses were unstable coming out of COVID, came blinking into the light. The thing I thought that would actually take them down, and they thought to be taken down by, was the lack of staff and the actual costs, not being able to get that productivity. But in addition to this, we now have got this massive energy crisis in terms of both its supply, in terms of actually getting it, but the actual cost is pretty certain now to be at least 4-fold this winter in comparison to normal winters of the last number of years.
How concerned are your members about the possibility of a lack of energy, a lack of electricity, and blackouts, and being told to turn off the lights this winter?
Well, I think the confidence is kind of rattled in the short term. I think there is quite a fear that we will see some rationing over the winter.
And how badly does that damage the reputation of Ireland Inc.?
Well, look, it doesn't help, but this is a kind of a symmetrical in the sense that this is not unique to Ireland. And in other societies, their demand is going to get depressed a lot more than ours because they're going into a bigger recession. And I think that's what we got. You know, there's a recession coming. There's no doubt there's a recession coming. It's a question of the scale of it. In the Irish case, it may be a different kind of recession. It might be quite imperfect. We mightn't all experience it together. And as I said, that's why those indigenous domestic businesses...
They're not all recessions.
Well, it can be, but the kind of shock in terms of big and small can often have the same kind of impacts. We're talking about here, some households have savings, some don't. We'd like to get to the households that don't have savings. Those who have savings can dip into it to get themselves through. Again, that'll be unpopular with people. Nobody wants to pay for what is a grudge purchase. We don't like buying energy. You know, we want to do nicer things, go on holidays, eat out. The energy bill will simultaneously, for those small businesses in the experience economy, take some of the spending power away from the households, as well as increase their costs. That's a pincer movement on a particular sector. And I think, you know, we're not talking about all businesses here. These are targeted response I'm talking about.